I don't hear nothing. I asked you a question, y'all. How are we doing? Great. That's right. Excellent. So, y'all enjoyed some lunch, yes? Everyone's feeling good? Everyone's having some energy? I have to say I'm really thankful to be here. I want to give it up for the previous speakers. That was excellent, right? I mean, live coding, Vue.js, Apollo, GraphQL. We saw an excellent talk about API design from Ruben and from all of the other speakers. It has been excellent as well. The organizing team, Ruben, Gevorg, Varser, all these people have just been incredible. I've got to know them over the past few days, and I think the organizers deserve. Absolutely. My name is Tejas. That's pronounced like contagious. I'm not contagious. I'm not going to give you anything besides hopefully a good talk. But it's just a little bit of a learning device to help you understand my name, because it is a little bit exotic. Now, if English is not your first language and the word contagious isn't enough, you're welcome to just look in my general direction and say stuff, and I'll try and figure it out. I live in Germany, in Berlin, and I work for a company called Contiamo. And what Contiamo does is we work in the area of machine learning and AI in order to create tools that help our customers make better decisions. Really high level, what that means is like if you're calling customer support for the 20th time and you're quite upset, if they're using our tools, they'll probably know. And they'll be extra nice to you and maybe give you something for free, right? It helps turn data into decisions. Now, on Contiamo, I serve on the front-end team, right? And what we do is we build applications. And this is relevant to the talk because a lot of it is kind of some lessons we've learned, some the hard way, while building software. And I think that's one common theme that we all have in this room is on some level, if we're working in code, we build software, right? So with Contiamo, what we have is an application. It is one application that we sell to our customers, but that's actually composed of, I think, 5 or 6, we're still working on it, 5 or 6 distinct applications that are able to run standalone and contained. And these distinct applications can be developed by different engineers, possibly different engineering teams, but the goal is we compose them into the one application that we give our customers. Does that make sense? And so how do we do that? How do we compose things together? That's a lot of the talk is influenced by some things we've learned there. More on that later. So the topic of this talk is scalable best practices for your development team. I need to qualify this because the term best practices is kind of phrasing we use. I do not know what exactly the best is. I'm not sure these are the best practices. Buzzwords, right? They're just scalable things that have worked for me that might work for you. Actually, a lot of the themes we'll talk about are fairly similar to what Ruben talked about this morning. And so I've gone ahead and renamed the talk to this. It's really Ruben's talk, but delivered by an Indian dude. Now, I really enjoy that, man. Lessons you learn by building a framework. Now, there's, of course, a little bit more to it, and I'll talk a little bit about some different aspects, but the theme is generally the same. It's some stuff that we've learned that might help you. I need to also say that I'm not like a thought leader or whatever that means. I literally am just a developer like everyone else. I sometimes talk, but I'm making software, right? I don't need to have more than that.
Sorry, can I suggest a name?
Sure.
Better scalable practices.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if they're better though. Like they're just practices, I guess. Sure. Before we get into it, we need to talk about the problem space we're working within. Now, I've thought about defining the problem, and I think that is a little bit nuanced because we're all building probably different kinds of software. We're building decision tools at Contiamo, but you might be building a real estate platform, a version control system, whatever it may be. And so identifying exactly the problem is a little bit hard. But I think all of us in the software development field have a few common themes. And so what we'll do is we'll explore the problem space and some common tenets that I think most of us have worked with. Now, these are 5 kind of shared tenets that I've seen while building software that can be problematic. And so what we'll do is we'll talk through some of them. Actually, we'll talk through all of them. And then we'll talk solutions. So if you're ready, let's just jump right into it. Number one, complexity. Right? If we're engineers, if we've spent some time writing software or maybe working with other engineers, we would have heard the term complexity. Complexity exists at the code base level, right? I think of algorithmic runtime complexity expressed with asymptotic notation, so like O of n for the runtime complexity of an algorithm. What that looks like is like in an autocomplete component, if you have one character and you do computations on it, you have two characters, you do when the size of the input affects the time it takes to finish the function, that you'd say that's a linear complexity. There's complexity at the code base level. There's also cyclomatic complexity. There's how you structure your files, how you architect your solutions, what do you use for deployment. There's all kinds of complexity on the code base. But might I submit to you, there's a whole nother league of complexity on the team side. Yeah? Berlin is an extremely diverse city. And I love that. We have all kinds of, we have more colors in the rainbow in Berlin. Am I allowed to code a comment? Anyway, but I love the diversity, but where there's diversity, it needs to be managed, right? That's why we have codes of conduct, because things can get misinterpreted maybe. And so how do we manage the team complexity? That's something I feel like we don't talk about very much. I work in a German company like it's a GmbH, and we have like 4 German employees, right? Now with that comes all kinds of different backgrounds and interpretations and things like this. Like someone once told me my implementation was wrong and I almost cried, right? How do we manage that? Number 2, burnout. How many of you have ever worked a weekend without wanting to? I asked this question, I see hands, yeah, a lot of us, right? How many of you have stayed at work a little bit longer maybe without, yeah, this is a real problem. Like if our applications are planned and designed correctly, I'm wondering if we can do better here. In fact, I think we can, because mental health is an important topic. I've done myself, neglected maybe physical fitness, maybe eating. My eating habits have gone really bad. I just kind of eat chips all day or something because I'm so caught up in work. And I get it. Code is fun. Like I was telling some of the volunteers, like just a couple weeks ago, I spent 24 hours writing code straight because it was fun and I liked like turning the Rubik's Cube and solving I get it. But this is something that I think we need to manage. My friend Sarah Vieira, a developer advocate who lives in Berlin as well, has an excellent talk at AgentConf that she did some time ago. It's called Your Brain Doesn't Have a Fix Flag. And it talks about the idea that you run ESLint with like -- fix. Yeah, your brain doesn't have that, right? And so she talks about mental health and really goes into detail about how we can pursue better mental health together as a community. This is a resource that I highly recommend. That's an area of the problem space that I think is worth talking about. Number 3, scale. Does your solution work well with one person as well as with 100? Does your software serve one user as well as it serves 1,000 users? Does your function generate the same output irregardless of the number of inputs? On the team side, is your team able to push out software? Is your team able to deliver with a team of 3, the same as with a team of maybe 30? Right? How do things scale? This is pure opinion, conjecture. I don't have any facts or anything to back this up, but in my experience, I've seen like where there's more senior engineers on a team, like software somehow ships slower. It's I don't know if it's like legit, but it's a pattern I've for sure seen, and I'm wondering why. I think it's because we like to discuss APIs and really like get a good design documentation written, but sometimes we also have to write code. And then penultimately, second to last in the problem space is this idea of deferred essentials. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this because I think it is really important. Now, if I talk about essentials with software development, do any essentials come to mind? What would you say is essential to writing software? Say that, knowing how to code? Yes, definitely, yeah. And then maybe a good editor, right? And then maybe Git. It would be really hard to build software without Git, no? Like if you're working on a team. These are essentials. I think some essentials, and we talked about this earlier, I think some essentials, we tend to just like, okay, yeah, no, we don't have time for that. Let's do this later. Let's make it work first. And some essentials we just kind of push to the side. I think of like good CI/CD pipelines. I think of maybe really optimizing your app with code splitting. And that is an optimization. I do think that can be done later. But various parts of software development, I would say, are absolutely essential to get right from the get-go. One in particular has been talked about at length in this conference, and I'll just keep banging that drum. Testing. Testing. I think testing is incredibly essential to software. And from what I've seen, from what we've talked about today, I also do this sometimes. I just defer that essential. Like, oh, I mean, I should write tests, but like, it's working, so how many of you have done this? Don't laugh at me. Yeah, that's right. I see you all judging me. It happens, right? But I have to say, testing, as we've said earlier, testing is fundamentally important to good software, right? And it's not because we just test for testing's sake. It's not because we just want to boast in code coverage, right? Bang your chest, ha, I have 90% code coverage. I'm a great programmer. No. Instead, we test to make sure what we add, what we change, what we delete from our apps doesn't break the rest of it. We want to comfortably have like mental peace about working with our applications. That is, in my opinion, the purpose of testing. My friend Guillermo tweeted some time ago saying this. I think this is incredible advice. He says, write tests, not too many, and mostly integration. Write tests, not too many, mostly integration. I think that is really, really valuable for front-end especially, but also generally software development today. If you've spent some time testing, you've seen this diagram. How many of you have seen this diagram? Can I get a show of hands? Oh, like 5 of you. This diagram suggests that there needs to be a related amount of tests per component in your application, right? And it suggests writing more unit tests, so breaking your application down into functions, and then testing those functions as individual units. Test them in isolation, and it makes sense too, because that's cheaper, it's easier, it's faster. And then if your functions work, there's a good chance that your integrations will work, so write fewer of those, because they're also a little bit more convoluted to test. And then acceptance testing, or end-to-end testing, is really hard. And so you don't want to spend a lot of time. That's kind of what this suggests. I would say I don't necessarily agree with this today, especially in the context of like, we have this component model now. With React, essentially your UI is a function of your state. And so if you just test your buttons in isolation and your cards in isolation, you'll have excellent buttons and excellent cards, excellent pages, but do they integrate? I'm not so sure, right? It's like a bodybuilder with huge muscles, but the body parts are like not together. So he can do the arms doing a push-up over there, the legs kind of walking. It's a little bit fragmented. My friend Kent C. Dodds suggests this diagram instead. And this, I think, makes a lot of sense when we think about testing. Again, I'm speaking about testing because it's important. And it's important that we get it and that we don't defer it. This diagram makes sense. Why? Because I think it factors in static analysis. Super valuable. How many of you use TypeScript, Flow, Elm, PureScript, Reason? Right. Static analysis is built into these languages. It gives you hint before any code is executed, gives you hints about is it going to work or not. It's kind of like testing before testing, right? And it'll tell you, it'll stop you. You're trying to do something weird. Stop. I can't, because of static analysis, I actually can't remember the last time I caused or saw from my team an NaN. Right? It's hugely valuable. Now, it also suggests unit tests, but I like that it suggests mostly integration because I believe that your app is a series of integrations. Your app is really one big integration. And so it's absolutely crucial that things integrate well. As for end-to-end, unless you have a really finite state machine of your UI, the paths that users can go down are quite large, and it would still be a little bit expensive to test. But I think, yeah, integration is absolutely crucial. Now, if you're interested in testing, I'd highly recommend testing JavaScript with Ken C. Dodds, testingjavascript.com. It really explains testing in a way that is approachable and emphasizes the need for, the motivation behind it. All of these things, when we defer our essentials, when we face burnout, when we don't scale well, all of these things ultimately lead us to technical debt. I spend a lot of time in a lot of conferences with a lot of community talking about things, and I find the community a little bit divided on this issue of technical debt. Some people like it, some people don't. I love it. I love it because in my free time when I'm not coding, I'm a songwriter. I think in metaphor. I like poetry. And this metaphor, I love it because it translates so well. Like see, for example, if I left this conference and went to Hawaii and flew first class in an A380, rented a Ferrari, and just drove through the volcanoes and went crazy, right? And then went back to Berlin, and I spent all of this on a credit card. my bank's going to come and be like, hey, where's my money, right? And then I say, oh, I can't pay, and then they take my children. I'm kidding. They don't do that. Different talk, collateral. But that metaphor translates to software development, I think, really well because I guarantee you will pay the cost. Like either your employer will pay for it with time and money, or you will pay for it maybe more immediately with just a dissatisfaction in the work you're doing. I've been there, right? I've written software, rushed to deliver, and I took no pride in it. I wasn't proud of it. I wasn't enjoying it. Technical debt does take a toll, and I think really encompasses a lot of the problem space we're talking about. Now that the problem space has been talked about, let's talk solutions. Who likes solutions? Give me a something. Yeah. Okay, you're still awake. Excellent. Let's talk solutions. Now, these are 5 solutions that have worked for us, that have worked for me at Contiamo and at previous teams. Again, it's not an exhaustive list. I am not a thought leader. It's not some silver bullet that will fix all your problems. It might help, so give it a try. I would love your feedback as well. So I'm on Twitter at Tejas Kumar _, and I would love to hear kind of what worked, what didn't. Maybe I should change up the talk and remove all of them. We'll see. With that, let's get right into it. Starting with this one, RDD. How many of you have heard of TDD? Right. It's where you write tests before writing code, and your tests fail because there's no code, and then you write code and then make the tests pass. Ooh, it's green. And it's this cycle, right? Red, green, refactor. I think TDD is great. How many of you have ever done BDD or heard of behavior? Do you like it? Yes. Awesome. That's great to hear. We tried it, and I couldn't get it. We like the product team worked with like gherkins, and we had to use like Selenium and things. I didn't get it. I prefer TDD. I more than that prefer a level backwards of RDD. See, for us, what we do is before we write tests or any code whatsoever, start with a README, start with documentation. I think documentation actually is one of those essentials that we also differ. It's okay, I'll update the documentation later. It works. So we start with a README. A year and a half ago, when we were kind of deciding the design for Contiamo, not the visual design, but how things fit together, we were very clear that it will be one shell that composes together the 5 or 6 different applications that make it up. Now, these applications, again, work in isolation and will actually be free and open source. But what we sell is the way we marry them together. Yeah? And so if these applications are standalone and managed by different engineers, maybe different engineering teams, we needed some level of consistency to make them feel like one product, if that's actually our business model. So what we identified was we need some type of design system or UI library. And so a year and a half ago, we started working on what we call operational UI. This is not some super special library. There's material design, there's material UI, there's semantic UI, there's a whole bunch of UI kits. This is but one in there, so we're not trying to compete or anything. We made this for us. We eat our own dog food, technically speaking, right? And so we made this thing because we wanted a very specific style. We wanted something very operational, kind of like Excel, where you do data exploration with data science and kind of small and modular. And so we created this specifically for us. Now, sometimes as our app evolves, we need to add a component, we need to maybe remove a component, change the API or something. All of this starts as an issue on GitHub. And if the person responsible for it will write down kind of the motivation. Why do we need this? What do we need? And a proposed API. If your team doesn't have some type of RFC process or design docs process, I would highly encourage one. It definitely helps us. From there, after we discuss and agree a little bit, they take that issue, which is written in Markdown on GitHub, and use it to write a README. And the README documents a little bit and also has that snippet of the proposed API. We use a tool internally called React Style Guidist by Artem Sapegin, who works at Wayfair. And this tool is awesome. It's like MDX before MDX is a thing. It will read Markdown and render React components based on that Markdown. Yeah, so it creates for you a living style guide. What's really cool is that same JSX snippet from the issue is now a failing test case in the browser. And so what we then do is we write JSX, we implement the component based on the Markdown document. And ultimately, we have something that fully fulfills that API promise that we've made. README-driven development has been a huge help for us at Contiamo, and I definitely recommend it because it also forces you to zoom out a little bit and think a little bit more about the design while getting your team on board. Number 2, take the time. This is something that isn't actually very technical, but I think it is one of the most important things I'll say today. It is okay to stop. I think it's totally fine to take 5 minutes, regroup, get stuff organized, and go back into the code. You see, for me, when I start writing code, when I start implementing, I'm like, give me a problem, I want to solve it. I want to solve the whole problem. I'm going to solve it right now. I'm going to spend 24 hours straight, fix it. Bad idea. What happens is slowly the code quality kind of just, it's a downhill curve because my cognitive load is so high. I would benefit a lot from saying, okay, whoa, stop. Go get something to eat, maybe breathe a little bit, come back, and do it. I think this is, and I also think you have a responsibility to your team if you're noticing someone having a hard time. The pull requests are diminishing in quality, right? You want to say, hey, let's go get something to eat. Because I speak and think in metaphors, and if you want a metaphor for this, I see software as building like a construction building, like a house. And if you're building the software, you're here and you're laying a brick, and then you put a brick on top of it, and then you put a brick to the side, and you do this, but then you zoom out and you're like, oh man, my house is sideways. At least this is my experience. And so you need, every once in a while, zoom out, have a look, and make sure that's okay. I actually think if you don't stop, you might make worse software than if you actually do. There's a popular lie in our culture today that says, no, keep going, keep moving forward, and I think it works against us. Number 3, 0-1-N. How many of you have heard of this principle? It's a prevalent principle in software development. It's generally the idea that you either do things no times, you do things one time, or you do things n times. And the n there becomes the responsibility of the computer, right? The reason we have computers is because they make our lives easier. So anything manual that you find recurring, as in more than once, it might be worth thinking about how can I automate this. For us at Contiamo, we had a very interesting use case where we wanted to build something a little bit complex, and the requirements became clear that we need some type of external global state container. Does this ring a bell for anyone? I said state container. That means Redux. Yeah, exactly. So the requirement looked like we needed Redux. I was not convinced we needed Redux. React, you may not need Redux, is the title of a very popular article. At this time, React 16.3 was out with first-class support for a new context API, which I think would have met our requirements. And so we had a lot of discussions around it. We ended up not using Redux. But in the discussions, one of the arguments was Redux is a little bit verbose. You write a lot of Redux. And I think that verbosity can be okay. I'm not sure it was right for our use case. But in trying to help that situation, one of our engineers, a brilliant man, I'm really thankful I get to go to work with him. His name's Fabien Bernard. He's French, likes cheese and wine, I think. Amazing. So he suggested using this tool here on the far right of the stage called Hygen. And he also evaluated a tool called plop.js. And this thing's cool. What it will do is ask you a few questions on the terminal in your CLI. You press enter. And then it takes your answers and applies them to templates and outputs like 4, 5, 6 n different files for you. It was really helpful. And it solved the problem. So we answer questions one time. Computer does it n times. That was a huge help for us. Now, when we started operational UI, we decided to use a CSS in JS solution for our component library. And the reason for that is because we use React. And if we're using React, we already described the structure of our components with JSX. We really liked the idea of co-locating style and structure in the same file. And so we used a library called Glamorous. Glamorous is kind of like styled components. It does the same thing. It allows you to create styled components. And we've used Glamorous for, I think, a year at that time. And most, if not all of, actually all of our components were fully Glamorous components. This was awesome. Everything was working smoothly. Operational UI at this point was at the core of every UI we had, right? It's a huge piece. By this point, we have things that use it. I go to work one morning, and Fabian says to me, "Hey, did you know Glamorous is like deprecated?" What? Stop! You're messing with me. No. Look, and he showed me on GitHub. There was one issue from the author saying, "Hey, there's a thing called emotion. Go use that. I'm no longer maintaining this." Right? And in my head, it's like like alarm bells because we depend on that. And so I was like, "How can I help? How can I help the community migrate? Because we're part of that community." I wanted to migrate my code base so that everybody else could also do theirs. And so I was thinking, at this point, I believe we had over 100 components that needed rewriting. So 0, 1, n. N equals 100. There's no way I'm manually going in and rewriting those things. That's not why they pay me. Maybe if I was like Russian hacker level, I could write a regular expression and then directory replace. You know? I can talk. I can't write regular expression. But what I ended up doing was I was thinking about Babel. How many of you use Babel? Babel, I think everybody uses Babel, right? ECMAScript uses Babel. Like the people who make JavaScript use Babel for polyfills. Babel, what it does is it does something called transpilation. What is that? It transforms, compiles, transpile. So if Babel can transform my code, can it transform Glamorous code to emotion code? Jamie Kyle, one of the engineers formerly at Atlassian, an absolute gift to the front-end community. I love Jamie Kyle, core contributor to Babel, I believe. He created a handbook that makes Babel accessible to people like me. Yeah? So I read the handbook, and I thought, oh, dude, it can totally do my thing, man. I speak like that to myself. And so what I did was I spent a couple days working on what Facebook would call a code mod, right? Something that would take Glamorous as input, output emotion code. Ran that command one time, and the entire code base was migrated to emotion. Right? That's our job as engineers. It is not to do things manually, repeatedly. I would like to encourage us, let's think about what can we automate that is recurring, and let's try to do that. Like, we got wins across the board. So we saved a lot of time and money. Our engineering team learned about abstract syntax trees and code mods. We migrated the core of all of our, like, everybody won. And we open sourced that. And so now the whole community gets that migration for free. Lots of wins, right? If I had gone and done it manually or trained myself in the art of regular expressions, may not have had a similar result. Divide and conquer. This is, look, I'm Indian. This is not what I'm not talking about what the British did to my country, okay? Let's get that out of the way. What I am talking about is with software, I've found that it really helps to divide and conquer function. This is not at Contiamo, but at a different team, we had two requirements. Number one, create and maintain a single page web application. It was Angular 1.5.3 at the time, and it was a working application. It was meeting the business goals. Some of you make faces when I say Angular 1.5.3. It works, and it gets the business job done. So I don't see a problem with that. It was that application, but we also had the use case where we would have to build and maintain a large number of lead generation pages, marketing pages. Now, for that, you need a different skill set, right? You need to think about inline CSS. You need to think about fast page loads. You need to think about static site generation. You need to have that design be implemented pixel perfectly because the design is optimized for conversion. It's a different set of skills. And so I find the term front-end engineer a little bit vague here because we needed something that was a little bit more nuanced. Berlin is also very, very, very diverse, and so we got all kinds of engineers, but not exactly what we were looking for. This was until we thought about what if we divide by function. See, because for the marketing pages, we needed someone with a solid understanding of styles to get the designs pixel perfect, to get them optimized for conversion. We needed a Node.js engineer to work with something like Gatsby or Next.js to generate static sites that would load quickly. We needed someone on the ops side to get stuff deployed really fast, right? These were specific responsibilities that we were able to flesh out. And the team, I heard, hired a SAS expert, a Node.js expert. This is a little bit more specific than front-end developer. They were able to fill the team and get it done, and get it done well. This is something that definitely worked quite well. And people have asked me, hey, what happened when the SAS person was sick? We also had 2 full-stack engineers who were able to fill the gaps. Now, they weren't as specialized as the specialists, but they were able to fill the gaps and everything ran smoothly. I would add one anecdote from Contiamo. With data science, what we do usually comes data visualization. And with data visualization, that's usually expressed with D3. I have to just give a quick shout out to my coworker, Imogen Mason. She is, she's brilliant. Like, PhD in mathematics, a total mathlete. I'm so honored to go to work every day and work with her. She does like D3 magic that I can't even. And then I get requested for review on the pull requests. Looks good. Merge. I'll also say, if you work in a startup, you may not have like a dedicated cloud team to make sure deployments work, but you might want some perks, right? Like pull request previews or things like this. For my personal project, I don't have a cloud team. I don't even understand Docker and Kubernetes so well. So what do? I want to deploy stuff. Zeit, honestly, for me, it's like the cloud team I wish I had. These guys bring the cloud down. It is helpful for me. Might be helpful for you. Right, we're nearly through. Embrace structure. My man Ruben talked about it this morning as well. Structure is good. We love structure. What is structure? Well, we talked about testing. That testing is a degree of structure. Git is a degree of structure. CI, CD is a degree of structure. Using things like ESTS, lint, prettier. Degree. I think structure, when looking at the definition of structure, is this. And this is actually from a dictionary. Anything that allows you to develop in a consistent fashion that allows growth and change. Now, this definition I got from Google, it really wasn't in the context of software, which I think is really cool. Like the develop there, it just means develop anything, even your life. Structure is good. I'm thinking about structure, and we at Contiamo need a lot of structure. Given that our main app is a composition of 5 or 6 different apps, it's very easy to lose structure there. Because each project did in the past have its own kind of build tooling. It had its own Webpack configuration. Some projects used Parcel, some others used Webpack. It was a little bit fragmented. They all used operational, but that's like the one thing they had in common. We had different prettier configuration, different TypeScript configuration. It was a soup. We thought we could do a little bit better. And so what we did at Contiamo was we created like a scaffold, a boilerplate, a seed project, as you would. We call it operational scripts, public open source. And it's kind of like Create React App. But for us, it doesn't really concern itself with anything UI or client related. It just handles the build tooling layer, right? And so our workflow now has been optimized significantly. Like we just npm install operational scripts, and that thing like takes over. If you don't have a build script in npm, it'll add it. If you don't have a dev server, it will add it. And like nowadays, our engineers will just npm install operational scripts, npm run start, you're running a dev server. That frees them up to actually do their job, right? Which is build UI, not necessarily build tools. Because of that as well, we now have one centrally managed Webpack configuration, TypeScript configuration, print configuration, as in prettier configuration, and so on. And it's shared, and our projects look homogeneous. It's easy. Someone like the owner of one of our products, Pantheon, can go on vacation. I can take over. Our team just works like a well-oiled machine now because we've embraced structure. I would encourage you to embrace structure as well. right? We're going to talk about a last few set of important ideas that I think help, and then we can wrap up. The first one on that list is basic. You see, I have a tradition at Contiamo. What I do is at the end of the week, Fridays we usually finish up really quick because people like to socialize and get beer and like enjoy life. And that for me is a good opportunity. I don't drink a lot of alcohol usually, as in when I'm in Berlin, but you know, it's conference, so. What I do at that time is I'll do a directory search across the whole code base and search for the word to do. And if it's something I can do, I'll do it. And I would encourage kind of just keeping an eye on that, because a friend of mine worked at a code base one time, and there were to-dos in there for like the past 3 years. And some of them were just like, rename this, you know? And so I get it, like I've done that too, but I try to avoid it now for that exact reason, because every one of you will laugh at me. You want to abstract away recurring state. So for us at Contiamo, in our applications, each of them, of course, we're doing some type of back-end communication. And usually how they did it, this was before suspense, before hooks with React. How they did it, it's still before hooks. Hooks is a proposal. Don't use it in production. Suspense is unstable. Don't use it in production. Anyway, we had these class components that had similar state. They had 3 bits, especially. Am I loading? Do I have an error? What is the data that I have? Like, they all had this. And in some cases, we handled loading states. In others, we kind of just went, eh. In some cases, we relayed errors to like Sentry or the user. In other cases, we didn't. But really, this was a recurring task that I think would be a good room for abstraction, and that's exactly what we did. We created an abstraction, so a separate library that would handle the concern of data fetching. And so we've removed those pieces of state from our components now and delegated them to a different library. That has been helpful. I would add that library is actually currently underway to also parse like open API specifications, which is kind of cool, and give you type definitions. We really like the Apollo client. As we saw earlier today, Apollo is just a gift. And we have plans of moving to GraphQL, though currently we don't use GraphQL because our customers are companies that have been around for like 20, 30 years, and we want to integrate with them. And they haven't yet adopted GraphQL to my knowledge. So we use REST, but there isn't an Apollo-style client like that for React. And so we've created one, trying to keep very similar API parity to Apollo so that when we do upgrade, it's not that much of a difference. One idea, I think an essential in this part of the world that we also defer, that I'd encourage us not to, is I-18N, also known as internationalization. You see, we're in Europe. Like, we're here in Armenia. We're surrounded. What do we have around us? We have Russian, we have German, we have French, we have Polish. It's just here. Yet some of us build software only in Armenian or only in English. I don't get it. Like, and this is not, pointing the finger. I do this at Contiamo too. Like, I sometimes just leave off internationalization. We're in Germany. We're surrounded by French and English and all the languages. I think internationalization needs to be thought out from the beginning. My coworker Fabian actually often is like, "Hey, did you add I-18N? Hey, did you do it? Did you do it?" And I'm just like, "Shut up, man." But he's right. I hate that he's right, but he's right. We need to pay attention to it. The last point on there is, I think, it needs to be in huge, bold letters, because if there is one thing that I think will drive the web platform forward, it's accessibility. If there's one thing I think we need to pay more attention to, it's accessibility. You see, we don't make software for just healthy people. Do you understand me? Like, yes? We don't do it. No, we make software for everyone. And I say this as a disabled person. I have a life-threatening illness, and sometimes I can't use my arms. So I really hope I'd be able to tab around your user interface and have it serve me. It's really important that we pay attention to screen readers, to alternative text for images, ARIA labels. It's something that I defer to, but something I think we need to pay attention to. More than that, I guarantee you every problem you're trying to solve is an accessibility problem. Yeah? If you zoom out on accessibility really high level, if you think about it, like React, Vue, Angular, they make UI development more accessible to you. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp make community more accessible to you. Contiamo makes data science more accessible to like large corporates. It's all about accessibility. So I want you to leave here today after the conference, not right now, after the conference, thinking in accessibility. How can I make this more accessible? How can I deliver this to my customer, my user? How can I make this concept more accessible to my team? Yeah? Because I think ultimately code is about communication. Code is about communication. JavaScript was recently described, well, not recently, JavaScript was described as the lingua franca of programming. What lingua franca is a bridge language. So person A speaks Armenian, person B speaks Hindi, right? And there's nothing in between. JavaScript is the lingua franca in this case would be a bridge language that connects people. I think code is about communication, yeah, to a machine but also to a human. How can you make your code base more accessible to your team? Yeah. I think accessibility has to drive everything we do. Now, once your software is working, tested, accessible, internationalized, you'll probably want some type of review process. Yeah, you'll want to get feedback. At Contiamo, what we do is we have a special dev mode that only our people see. It can be enabled for customers too, but it's like there's a secret way to access it that we don't tell people yet. And what that'll do is it'll just kind of, it's like popping the hood of a car and looking at the engine, right? I pop the hood of my car, I don't understand what I see. I'm like, okay, 6 cylinders. I don't even know if I have, I don't even have a car. Metaphor, right? It's kind of like that, but with our software. It has a whole bunch of key value pairs that really mean nothing to our customers or our users. At least I don't think so. But there's a copy button. And so they're able to copy that, report an issue, paste this complete thing that makes no sense to them, and we read it, and we're like, that's how they reproduce that thing. And then we go in and fix it. It makes our bugs really easy to track, and I'll recommend something like that. There's a study that Nielsen did. Nielsen is a market leader in like research and facts, right? Nielsen did this interesting study, and they concluded that you need to test your app on 5 users only to get 90% to identify 90% of the issues in your app. Isn't that crazy? Like 5 users would identify 90% of the issues in your app. There's a link there on the bottom to the citation of this as a citation of this article. I highly recommend it. It's beautiful. Sure. How many of you have 5 people you could test your app on right now? Really? You don't have friends? Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I'll be your friend. Loneliness is bad, guys. Community. So let's recap. That's why we have conferences, huh? Anyway, let's recap. So these are the 5 solutions that have worked for me in various teams, and I'd recommend quickly thinking about how you can implement them in your team. I'd love to hear from you. That is README-driven development. It's okay to stop. You'll want to automate your recurring tasks. You'll want to divide and conquer your functions. And lastly, embrace structure. It is good. My final point is this. I think code is great. I think community is more important. I think people matter more than code. And really, if code is in fact about communication, if JavaScript is in fact the lingua franca of languages, then we have to have, how many of you know that communication just gets better when there's love involved? Like, yeah, like you write code because you love your job, and hopefully you love your team. And so the last thing I'll say today is I'd encourage you as you leave, think about these things. Love your neighbor as yourself and write good software. Thank you so much. My name is Tejas Kumar. It's my honor to be here. Are there any questions in the house? I guess they'll hand you mics. Or you could just ask, maybe?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, I'm working part-time on freelance. Like, I work a lot with small startups. Like, I do, like, little jobs, like, make a landing page and things. And as I start working with startups, so I see that
Yeah.
go quickly. And what I see is they basically start to, there's the term that over engineering when you start to like do things too
Yeah.
complicated. So I don't know if that what I use is a technical term, but I call it over managing.
Mm.
So, one time I like made a freelancer page, you enter your email, submit, and then they will send you an email. So yeah, I sent it to the customer. He said, yeah, cool, but here like I have some problems. So can you change the margin a little bit, like closer? So I changed it, and I sent it to him, and I got I asked him like 4 or 5 days later. So like, is it cool? Like,
Yeah.
change closer, and it's like, oh, okay, we are discussing it with my team, the merging. So I wanted to ask you if you have that over managing problem at Contiamo, and if you do, how do you fight it?
Yeah. So what he asked me was about over managing. So a lot of discussion and a lot of managing behind decisions, right? And he asked me if I have that at Contiamo, and how do I fight it? Now, I think at Contiamo, I can answer from my experience. At Contiamo, we really value like the discussion. We really value ideas. I think this is the thing. Like ideas are what matter more than I think even the software. And I think people need to express those ideas. They need to be heard and understood. So I wouldn't say there's over-managing, but there is discussion about ideas that aims to be constructive. And I think that's really important for a team, because if someone feels like they have an idea that they can't express, they leave. They go find a place where they can. I think everybody has a voice, and everybody actually deserves to be heard. And I've had ideas that were, in my opinion, bad ideas. I should not have said that. But the goal is to have a culture where it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to say something that may be wrong. It's fine. And so for us, that's what we value, the idea and the communication around it. When something goes into the realm of, okay, maybe we're over-discussing this, we'll stop. It's okay to stop. We'll stop, we'll reflect, and we'll bring up the discussion the next day if it's still a strong topic. Yeah. Any others? You had a question right there, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have tried, not in production, but I have tried Angular. I agree with you. I think Angular is a framework that leaves fewer decisions up to the user. And I think React is a little bit more flexible, at least, especially even earlier. React concerned itself with rendering UI, right? So routing, that concern, still you would have to think about, whereas Angular, I believe, just gives you that. Yeah, so to answer your question, I have tried Angular. But as an engineer, I prefer, we need to kill tribalism. Like one tool, one framework is not better than the other framework. They do not compete, they complete, yes? So I have tried Angular. For me as an engineer, I like the freedom to choose this router or that router. I like thinking about build tools. I like thinking about dev tools. It's a preference. Yeah. Right, if there are no further questions, thank you very much. All right, stop there.